Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. Morning in the small town of Helena Ridge always began with the faint smell of burnt coffee and cold winds sweeping across the snow-covered hills. Clara Rivera pulled her second-hand coat tight around her neck as she stepped out of the old trailer, its outer paint peeling off in patches like the scales of time. Beneath her feet, the frozen ground shimmered with the silvery gray tint of a Montana winter. 22 years old. 2 jobs. A mother was slowly dying from end-stage kidney failure, with a transplant wait list that was nearly hopeless. She reminded herself to smile as she stepped into the coffee shop at the town's main intersection. "Good morning, Clara," the regulars greeted her, and she smiled back, hiding the red in her eyes from lack of sleep. The morning passed like any other, grinding machines, the jingle of the doorbell, orders being called out. But around 9 a.m., while Clara was wiping down the espresso machine, the manager called from the front counter. "Clara, you've got a letter." She frowned. Who even sends paper letters these days? The envelope sat in the receipt tray, thick cream-colored paper, the upper corner stamped with the logo of the Wyoming Silver Creek Foundation, the charity organization under Vail Industries, the largest corporation in the Montana-Wyoming region, known for clean energy projects and the thousands of acres of the Vail Ranch. Clara felt her chest tighten. She remembered last month's event vividly, where she'd worked as a temporary server at Vail Ranch to earn an extra $150. She had agreed to urgently alter a VIP guest's dress, and she might have shortened it more than intended. God, were they going to sue her? Demand compensation? She didn't have any money. A rush of panic crawled down her spine. Clara tore open the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a printed document along with a private meeting invitation, both signed by Aidan Vail, the company's CEO and owner. Blue ink signature, straight, cold, and somehow too serious. "You are invited to a private meeting with Miss Clara Rivera. Reason: for humanitarian and legal purposes. Time: 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Location: Silver Creek Executive Office, Sheridan, Wyoming." At the bottom was an emphasized line: "Attendance required. No representative may substitute." Clara froze. For humanitarian and legal purposes? The phrase sliced through her like a dry, cold blade, half threatening, half hinting at something far more serious than accidentally cutting a dress too short. She could barely feel the ground beneath her feet anymore. After her shift, Clara drove the old 2001 pickup truck back to the trailer, the engine rattling as if it were about to explode. Her mother, Mrs. Rivera, was sitting by the window, her legs swollen, her face gaunt, but her eyes still full of gentle warmth. "Mom, I'm home." Clara forced the usual cheerfulness into her voice. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" her mother asked when she saw the thick envelope in Clara's hand. Clara avoided her gaze and stuffed the letter into her coat pocket. "It's nothing, Mom. Just advertisement mail." Her mother looked at her, eyes sharp and knowing, as if she could see the heavy stone Clara was hiding inside. But she didn't ask more. She was too exhausted to argue. Clara set up the portable dialysis machine, checked the fluids, the water levels, the blood pressure, things a 24-year-old girl was never meant to memorize. But Clara had to, because full hospital treatment was a luxury they could never afford. The machine beeped softly. Her mother winced. "I can handle it," she said, her voice weak as a breeze. "Don't worry." But Clara worried. She worried so much she couldn't sleep. All night she lay staring at the trailer ceiling, wind howling through the metal seams, her mind tangled with fear. What if Vail Industries sued her? She had no money. What if she had to go to court? What if they demanded thousands? She couldn't afford any of it. And humanitarian and legal purposes? There was nothing humanitarian about receiving a signed letter from the CEO of the region's largest corporation. No, impossible. She was just a broke barista, a girl who altered clothes for $20 apiece. Someone with nothing but a sick mother and nights fragmented by exhaustion. Aidan Vail was a legend in the region, a billionaire living on the picture-perfect Vail Ranch. Featured on the cover of Forbes, known across Montana as the Golden Man of the Valley, and he had sent her a letter? No way. And that night, Clara opened the letter and read it again. Humanitarian and legal reasons. Humanitarian and legal. The more she read it, the more a cold shiver ran down her spine. There was something bigger, stranger, something that didn't belong to the ordinary world she lived in, something that was about to sweep into her life like a winter wind rolling down the mountains. She sat alone in the cramped kitchen, the yellow light casting shadows on her calloused hands. Cold seeped through every crack. Her heart pounded, each beat heavy and loud. She whispered, "What does he want from me?" She didn't know, but fate did. And that letter, a letter that felt like it had been sent to the wrong person, would not just change one day of her life. It would change her entire life, in a way no one could ever imagine. Morning in Montana carried a kind of light that belonged only to this place, soft as a ribbon of silk, yet cold enough to remind anyone that winter in this region never truly left. Sunlight brushed across the rows of pine behind Vail Ranch, glimmered over the misty surface of the lake, then spilled across the roof of the main house, an expansive, modern log home that still held the rugged soul of the northern land. Inside, Aiden Vail stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, staring out at the vast sky he both loved fiercely and feared he would no longer belong to for much longer. At 38, he should have been in the prime of a man's life, career at its peak, a strong body, an open future. But last week's doctor's appointment had shattered all of that. The medical file lying in front of him, simple, cold, and merciless, held 3 words he never imagined would be tied to his name: end-stage liver failure. He had known he wasn't well. In recent months, he'd tired faster, his breath grew shallow, and a faint yellow tint had begun forming near his temples. But hearing the doctor say it outright, in the low, honest voice of someone whose entire profession was saving lives: "You have about 9 to 15 months, and the chance of a liver transplant is almost zero." The reason was tucked into one small line that cut deeper than a knife: a B-, Bombay subtype. A blood type so rare it was like searching for aliens to ask for an organ. Aiden braced both hands on the table and bowed his head. His stance was strong, yet lonely, the kind of loneliness carried by those bearing a burden too heavy to let anyone witness them fall. His black hair was neatly trimmed, strands of silver at the temples sharpening the angles of his face. His cheeks had hollowed slightly from months of irregular meals, but his gray eyes, the ones the press once called the sharpest blade of Vail Industries, held a sorrow he could no longer hide. A soft knock sounded. "Are you all right?" Dr. Dawson asked, standing at the doorway, as if afraid to make the room heavier than it already was. Aiden swallowed the tightness in his throat. "I'm fine." He wasn't, and they both knew it, but Aiden Vail was not the kind of man who admitted to collapse easily. When the doctor left, silence settled again. Aiden stared at a framed photo on the table. 3 people, him and his parents, smiling brightly at the entrance of Vail Ranch when he was 8. He remembered his father's words clearly: "This land is blood and bone. Whoever holds the land holds the family's soul." And now, with death inching closer each day, Aiden understood that his greatest fear wasn't dying. It was that his father's legacy would fall into the wrong hands. The wrong hands belonged to Brian Vail, his cousin, handsome in a slick, polished way, sports cars, nightclubs, gambling debts. If inheritance law remained unchanged, upon Aiden's death, Brian would automatically inherit Vail Industries and Silver Creek Ranch. A total disaster. Aiden let out a dry, humorless snort. "No way," he muttered. "He's not ruining this place. Not while I'm alive. And not even when I'm dead." But to stop that from happening, he had exactly one option. He needed a legitimate child before he died. An heir to protect the ranch and the company from Brian. Aiden didn't want a fake marriage. He didn't want to turn anyone into a tool, but time wasn't on his side. He had 12 months left, if luck was kind. So he needed a woman who was kind, not ambitious, not a gold digger, not chasing fame or money. Someone who could love a child, someone he could trust. He closed his eyes and the image came to him, a memory carried like a whisper from fate. Clara Rivera, the event server at the ranch last month. A small, gentle girl in a black uniform, hair tied up neatly, cheeks flushed from running trays all night. But what Aiden noticed wasn't her appearance. It was how she picked up the fallen cupcake of a stranger's child, cleaned the little boy's hands, and smiled at him with a warmth brighter than sunlight. How she apologized even when it wasn't her fault. How she smiled at the elderly guests and quietly adjusted their shawls when they didn't notice. A natural kindness, unpolished, unperformed. After the event, he asked the HR team about her. Not to hire her, but because something inside him urged him to understand the life behind that girl. When the file arrived, Aiden needed a few minutes to steady himself. Her mother had end-stage kidney failure. They lived together in an old trailer. The wait list for a transplant was impossibly expensive. Insurance couldn't cover enough. Clara worked 2 jobs just to get through each day. That was when Aiden realized life had placed before him a woman whose heart was large, but who was cornered by circumstances just as he was. If he offered a deal, she would have a chance to save her mother. And his child, if fate allowed it to exist, would have a mother he could trust. The thought made Aiden press a hand to his forehead and sigh. Cruel, but the only thing he could do. He stood and buttoned his black suit jacket. Despite the weight loss from illness, the suit still fit sharply along his tall frame. He looked in the mirror. Dark slacks, white shirt, gray tie, a face paler than usual, yet eyes that still held the authority of a CEO who'd built an empire. But today, there was something else in those eyes. Fear. The fear of a man confronting his own limits for the first time. Aiden turned on his computer and opened the draft he'd written the night before. Clara Rivera, I would like to request a meeting with you for humanitarian and legal reasons. Sincerely, Aiden Vale. Just 3 short lines, but they would change the lives of 2 people in ways neither could ever foresee. He hit send, and somewhere across the Montana Valley, a girl was tying her hair while brewing coffee, unaware that the message was on its way to her like a lightning strike shaped by destiny. Aiden leaned his forehead against the glass, staring out at the endless land. Forgive me, Clara, he whispered as if speaking to his own conscience, but I have no other choice. And that was the moment he chose to do the cruelest thing of his life in exchange for one last chance to save the legacy, the unborn child, and everything he had ever believed in. But deep in his heart, he knew. Part of that decision wasn't just survival. It was because of the girl who had smiled at a child she didn't know, a smile he remembered more clearly than his own name. The emergency department of Montana General always carried a scent that hovered somewhere between cold antiseptic and fragile hope. Clara stood at the payment counter, her face drained of color, both hands gripping her bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The neon lights washed over her exhausted skin, over her brown eyes ringed with shadows from sleepless nights. Behind her, the automatic doors kept sliding open and shut, bringing in the shrill cries of ambulance sirens, each one squeezing her heart a little tighter. The cost for emergency dialysis is $30,000, the nurse repeated for the second time, her voice gentle but not gentle enough to soften the blow. Without payment up front, we can't take her into the dialysis room immediately. Clara just stood there. She couldn't cry. Her eyes were dry, her heart stalled for a few seconds. 30,000? She echoed like a shadow. She didn't even have 300. In the ER, her mother lay unconscious, her complexion gray, each breath dragging through her lungs like being pulled through a rusted metal grate. When they brought her in, the doctor was clear. A few hours' delay and her kidneys would shut down completely. Clara gripped the counter, her entire body shaking. She had done everything she could. Extra shifts, side jobs, midnight sewing, begging for insurance extensions, borrowing money. Yet the medical bills kept multiplying like a monster growing in the dark, devouring every cent she saved. Then her phone vibrated in her pocket. The caller ID lit up, Aiden Vale. She wanted to throw the phone against the wall, but her hands were trembling too badly, so she pressed it to her ear instead. Clara? His voice was lower than usual. Deep, worn, not cold or commanding, but tired and gentle, as if he had just endured another wave of pain. She swallowed hard. I can't talk right now. You're at the hospital? Clara shut her eyes. He knew everything. He always knew everything. I know the insurance rejected her claim. I'm sorry, Aiden said, his tone steady in a way that made it even more heartbreaking. But Clara, no one is forcing you. It's just that time is running out for both of us. His words made her legs collapse onto the nearest bench. Everything inside her caved in like an old building struck by a gust of wind. She choked out, If I say yes, my mom will get treated immediately, right? A short silence, then Aiden answered, I've already authorized the dialysis. They're just waiting for your confirmation. Clara gasped as if someone had pushed her underwater. Why, why would you do that? Because if we sign the contract tomorrow, your mother might not live until then. His voice broke slightly as if his body was hurting again. You only have to say one word. Just one. Clara covered her mouth. Her tears didn't fall in drops. They streamed, spilling over her trembling hand. What he was asking for was brutal, unfair, cruel. But letting her mother die before her eyes was even crueler. She looked through the glass, saw her mother lying motionless in the ER bed, tubes around her arms, cold white lights falling over the face that had protected her all her life. She knew she had no way out. Clara inhaled, a long, trembling breath that felt like it was tearing her in two. Then she spoke, small, broken, but unmistakably clear. I agree. There was no celebration, no relief, no triumph. Only a quiet kind of collapse. Aiden responded immediately, without hesitation. The ambulance team has been activated. The surgical staff is ready. Your mother will be in the dialysis room within 3 minutes. Clara's throat closed. She sobbed, covering her eyes, her shoulders shaking violently. Clara. His voice softened completely. I know this isn't fair to you, but I promise you, I will honor everything written. She didn't answer. She only buried her face in her hands and cried like a child. A moment later, a medical staff member rushed toward her. Miss Rivera, your mother will be taken into the dialysis room right now. We need your signature. Her legs were so weak they barely held her up, but Clara forced herself forward. She held the pen in her trembling hand, the ink shaking the way her heart did. Sign for her mother to live. Sign for herself to enter a marriage no one would dream of. Sign for a future she couldn't tell was salvation or a free fall. Clara put her signature on the final line. Her tears fell onto the contract. 1 drop, then 2, then 3. That night, she became Aiden Vale's wife on paper. And on that same night, her fate veered onto a completely different path, carrying with it the most heartbreaking, yet bravest yes of her life. The morning of the wedding unfolded under the pale light of early March in Montana, a soft, breath-like glow laying a thin veil of mist across the valley, as if the whole landscape was holding on to a secret too heavy to speak. Clara stood in front of the mirror in the small hospital restroom, where she had just signed the final papers for the doctors to take her mother into emergency dialysis the night before. The white wedding dress that Vale Industries had prepared exactly to her request was a modest version, ankle length, fitted to her slender frame. No lace, no crystals, none of the luxuries she was too afraid to touch. Just a tasteful, simple dress that made her look like a bride. If people didn't know that only last night she had sat crying on a cold tile floor because her mother was about to die. When she stepped out of the hospital wing, the cold wind brushed her cheeks and made them tremble. She tightened her coat, her heart stumbling when she saw the black SUV from Vale Industries waiting at the front gate. The driver bowed slightly, asked nothing, and simply opened the door for her. All the way to the small marriage license building in Silver Creek, Clara stayed silent, her hands interlocked so tightly that her fingers ached. Aiden was waiting inside, an image entirely opposite the fear and chaos swirling inside her. He stood in front of the wooden desk where the county judge was arranging papers, wearing a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, his hair neatly combed. But his eyes always told the truth about his health. They were slightly sunken, shadowed, with a faint yellow tint, signs of a liver giving up on its owner. Yet when he saw Clara walk in, his gaze warmed instantly, like a cabin fire in winter. Not pity, not awkwardness, just a tenderness Clara never expected from a wealthy, busy, dying man. You're here. His voice was low, rough, but gentle, as if he feared waking her fears. Clara pressed her lips together and nodded. She barely recognized her own voice. Yes. No flowers, no music, no guests except two legal clerks and the judge. The ceremony lasted less than 12 minutes. Just formal words, two signatures, and then Aiden handed her a small white gold wedding ring, minimalist but heartbreakingly beautiful. He didn't touch her hand right away. He hesitated, silently asking if she was ready. When Clara slightly extended her hand, he slipped the ring onto her finger with deliberate slowness. Slow enough that she felt the warmth of his fingers, not intrusive warmth, but the kind that tried not to frighten her. No kiss, Aiden murmured softly, as if joking to ease the thin thread of tension in the air. His lips curved faintly. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Clara let out a small laugh, soft, unexpected, surprising even to herself. In this strange moment, heavy with pressure and fear, Aiden somehow made her feel less like she was being purchased, less like she was trapped in a cruel agreement. He made it as humane as possible. After completing the paperwork, he opened the car door for her. We'll go back to the ranch. You'll have your own room, everything you need. No one will bother you unless you want them to. Thank you, Clara whispered. She didn't know what she was thanking him for. Saving her mother? Not treating her like a contract? Or making an impossible marriage feel slightly less terrifying? Vale Ranch sat on the outskirts of town, about 15 minutes from the tiny cluster of houses and the lone gas station in Silver Creek. Asphalt turned into a smooth dirt road, fields of pale gold stretching on both sides, and far in the distance the faint outline of the Rockies blurred by mist. Clara looked out the window, feeling as though someone had turned the contrast of her life up by several levels, wider, brighter, and foreign. The main house appeared after a bend, a blend of wood and glass, sloped roof, wide balcony, the kind of place she had only seen in architecture magazines. A row of rocking chairs sat on the porch, wide windows faced the fields, and a garage big enough for 3 cars. Welcome home, Aiden said, like a line he was obligated to say, but his voice was so sincere that Clara couldn't treat it as courtesy. Inside, the house smelled of wood, coffee, and a hint of clean soap. A middle-aged woman with her hair in a tidy bun stepped out from the kitchen, a dish towel still in her hand. Mr. Vale, she greeted with a small smile, then glanced at Clara with curiosity, but not judgment. This must be my wife, Clara, Aiden said plainly, without hesitation. Clara, this is Mrs. Hughes. She's the housekeeper, and the person who actually runs this place. His tone made Mrs. Hughes laugh, and Clara's shoulders eased a little. At least someone in this house laughed. Lovely to meet you, dear, Mrs. Hughes said, her voice warm in a grandmotherly way. If you need anything, just let me know. Moving somewhere new is never easy. New home. The words made something inside Clara flutter. An image of the old trailer, the thin walls, the leaking roof, the dampness and disinfectant smell, where her mother lay alone. She nodded, smiling faintly, though her eyes still carried sadness. Aiden led her upstairs. Long hallway, thick carpet, framed photos, summer ranch, winter ranch, running horses, herds of cattle grazing. He stopped at a dark wooden door. Your room. He said your so naturally, a small shift that made everything feel a little less foreign. If anything doesn't suit you, tell me. Everything can be changed. She stepped in. A room 3 times the size of her old trailer. A queen bed with a white duvet, a large window overlooking the fields, an oak desk, a closet already stocked with a few empty hangers, and a private bathroom tiled in white. You didn't have to do all this, she blurted out. I only needed a place to sleep. Clara, Aiden leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. I know what we have isn't normal, but at the very least you won't live worse than you did in that trailer. It's the bare minimum I can do. He didn't say compensate, but she heard it in his tone. And strangely, that made her feel less like she was being bought, more like she was being cared for. Thank you, she said quietly. For the first time, she said you without stumbling. Aiden nodded. I'll let you rest. Dinner is at 6. If you want to visit the hospital, I'll have the driver take you at any time. As he turned to leave, Clara asked without thinking, "And your room?" He stopped, turned back, his gray eyes meeting her brown ones. "End of the hall, left side, as far from you as you want." His lips tugged into a small, nearly invisible smile, trying to turn something heavy into something feather-light. "I won't bother you unless you want me to. Anything related to obligations," he hesitated but continued, "will only happen when you feel emotionally ready. There will be no pressure." Clara hadn't expected the topic to be addressed so bluntly. Her whole body heated. "But the contract," she stammered. "The contract doesn't require you to suffer," Aiden replied. "I won't turn myself into a man I despise." He closed the door gently behind him, leaving Clara alone in the new room with a strange feeling. Amid all the insanity and the biggest transaction of her life, she somehow felt safe, at least with the man trying so hard not to scare her. That first night in the new home, Clara visited her mother at the hospital, sitting by her bed until the nurse reminded her, "Visiting hours are over." Her mother slept better, her skin rosier thanks to the medication and machines. Clara lingered in the parking lot, staring at the velvet black Montana sky, stars glittering, cold air nipping her cheeks. She was Aiden Vale's wife, a CEO waiting to die. She would bear his child. Her mother would live longer, maybe years, because of the funds he had provided. It all sounded like a wild Netflix plot, yet it was her real life. And back at the ranch, most of the lights were off except for a warm glow along the upstairs hallway. Clara showered, changed into a loose t-shirt and leggings, and got into bed. She thought she wouldn't sleep, but exhaustion tugged at her eyelids. She had just closed her eyes when a soft knock came. Clara's heart jerked. Part of her knew this was within the agreement. Another part wanted to hide under the blanket like a child. "Clara?" Aiden's voice came through the door, deep but gentle. "May I come in? If you're still awake." She swallowed. "Come in," she whispered so quietly she barely heard herself. The door opened. Aiden stood there, no suit, wearing a dark t-shirt and sweatpants, looking younger, but also more fragile. No CEO armor, just a man who looked a bit pale, with tired eyes. He didn't approach the bed. He stopped at the edge of the rug, as if drawing an invisible boundary. He cleared his throat. "I think we should talk before anything happens." Clara sat up, pulling the blanket to her chest like a tiny shield. "Okay." Aiden took a slow breath. "I know none of this is romantic for you. It isn't for me either. It's not like what a wedding night is supposed to be." He let out a small self-mocking laugh. "I just want you to know, I'll ask before every step, and we can stop at any moment. If you say stop, I stop. If it's too hard for you, we'll wait. My doctors say I still have time. No one has the right to touch you unless you want it." Something inside Clara loosened. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until now. "So she whispered, if tonight I say I'm not ready, then I say goodnight and go to my room," Aiden replied simply, as if answering a meeting question. "No penalties, no fees, no complaints filed via email." His lips curved. Clara let out a small laugh, unexpected but real. "Do you always talk like you're in a board meeting?" she asked. "I'm trying to be less frightening," Aiden shrugged. "I don't want to be the man you have to endure. I want, if possible, for you not to hate me." The words were soft but landed deep. Clara looked at him under the warm yellow light, the sharp jawline, the straight nose, the faintly yellow skin, the tired eyes. Nothing about him resembled a cruel man buying someone's body. He looked like a man trying to organize the pieces of his life before it ended, while hoping the people affected would hurt as little as possible. "I don't hate you," she said honestly. "It's just, everything is too fast." "I know." He took one step closer, still keeping distance. "If tonight all you want is for me to sit here for a few minutes and talk, then leave. That's fine." Clara stayed silent. Her mother was alive in the hospital. She was in a warm, comfortable room. Her legal husband was standing there, patiently waiting for her word. "Are you," she asked softly, "in a lot of pain?" Aiden blinked, surprised. "Tonight, less." The meds are still working. He touched the right side of his abdomen, an unconscious gesture. But sometimes it hurts so much I can't breathe. And when that happens, you're alone? She whispered. Most of the time, yeah. He shrugged lightly, pretending it didn't matter. It makes me nicer to people, he joked. Clara looked down at her hands, then up again. Can you sit here for a bit? She asked, pointing at the chair near the window. Just sit. I'm not promising anything else. Aiden nodded instantly, as if she had offered him something more valuable than he hoped. I'm very good at sitting still, he said, moving to the chair, leaning back slightly, eyes drifting out the window toward the dark fields. If you're tired, sleep. I'll leave once you do. Clara dimmed the lights, leaving only the bedside lamp. She lay down, turned her back to him, but she could feel his presence clearly, non-intrusive, gentle, like a small source of warmth. She thought she would toss and turn, but the sound of his steady breathing, the faint rustle of his shirt, the whisper of wind through the window, somehow they soothed her, pulling her toward sleep. After a while, in the blur between waking and dreaming, she heard the chair creak softly, Aiden bending forward. A quiet, bitten-back groan slipped out. Clara opened her eyes. She saw his silhouette bent over, hand gripping his right side, shoulders tight. Are you okay? She rushed out of bed, forgetting everything. Sorry, he panted. Just a spasm. I'm fine. Go back to sleep. Clara moved to him instinctively, blanket draped around her shoulders. Let me get you water or call someone. No, he shook his head, sweat beading at his temple. It'll pass in 5 minutes. I'm used to it. I'm used to it. Those words squeezed her heart painfully. She didn't think. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder, pressing gently, the same way she used to do for her mother when she had pain spasms. Breathe slowly, she whispered, in and out. Even in pain, Aiden let out a small laugh. You're teaching a CEO how to breathe? If you want to stay alive as a CEO, then please breathe, she replied, her voice a little softer. They stayed like that for a few minutes. Aiden hunched forward, breathing carefully as the pain ebbed. Clara's hand on his shoulder, feeling the heat under his shirt and the tiny tremor in his muscles. Finally, he lifted his head, pain still lingering in his eyes, but calmer. Thank you, he said slowly, for being here. Clara shook her head. I should be the one thanking you. If it weren't for you, my mom. We don't have to measure who owes who, Aiden interrupted gently. We're in an agreement, but beyond the paperwork, I hope we can still be kind to each other. Clara studied him for a long moment. In that instant, a dying man didn't feel like an abstract concept in a medical file, but someone real, someone fighting to stay whole while his body betrayed him. I think, she whispered, I can try. That night, no obligations were fulfilled. Aiden stayed a little longer, making sure the pain had passed. When Clara began to doze near the edge of the bed, he stood, instinctively pulled the blanket up to her shoulders, and whispered, Good night, Mrs. Vale. Half asleep, Clara heard those words, Mrs. Vale, and they no longer felt as heavy as a sentence, but like something waiting to be redefined. She drifted off again, knowing this marriage was still a transaction on paper. But every time she saw Aiden fight through pain, her heart softened. And sometimes, through the smallest cracks of compassion, something like the beginning of love could slip in. Mornings on Vale Ranch always began with a soft golden light that slipped over the mountains like slowly melting honey. The wooden staircase was still cold from the long night, and the faint creak of the floorboards sounded almost like a greeting to a new day. Clara was beginning to get used to that rhythm. Not the rhythm of a wife, but of someone staying long-term while trying not to touch anything too deeply. But Aiden, he was also learning how to live with another person for the first time in years. One morning when Clara came downstairs to make coffee, Aiden was already sitting at the kitchen island. He wore a gray hoodie and sweatpants, looking a few years younger without a suit, yet noticeably paler. On the table lay a cluttered stack of papers, business reports, ranch land maps, the winter expense ledger. Clara paused. How long have you been working? Aiden shrugged as though it were nothing worth mentioning. Couldn't sleep. Then he looked up, his eyes softening a little when they met hers. You want your coffee strong or medium? She blinked in surprise. A CEO who knew how to make coffee. However you make it, she said, trying to keep her voice even. He turned on the machine, saying nothing. But maybe it was the first time Clara realized, despite spending most of his life in boardrooms, Aiden's hands made coffee with surprising skill. I used to work as a barista in college, he explained, as though reading her mind. Low pay, but good tips. Clara let out a soft laugh. The first time in days her voice didn't shake. I guessed wrong. I thought you were born knowing how to run board meetings. Aiden gave her a half-teasing, half-gentle look. I learned a few things before my father passed and left all of Vale Industries to me. But coffee, I learned that myself. He placed the mug in front of her, carefully, almost as if afraid it would slip from her fingers. Try it. She took a sip. Strong, warm, smooth like melted chocolate. Better than Starbucks, she admitted. A small, rare, comfortable silence drifted between them. The first lesson came just like that. Unexpected. After breakfast, Aiden gathered his papers, then looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that made her wonder if she'd done something wrong. You like reading economics books? He asked. Clara startled. I stayed home a lot and didn't know what to do, so I grabbed a few books from your library. She hadn't meant to confess, but Aiden didn't seem bothered. On the contrary, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. If you enjoy them, he said slowly, I can teach you. Teach what? Financial management, how the ranch operates. Then, as if afraid she'd misunderstand, Aiden added, it has nothing to do with inheritance or responsibility. Just, if you're staying here for a while, I think it's better if you understand the things around you. Clara nodded, unsure whether to feel grateful or intimidated. But Aiden continued, voice soft enough to be almost a whisper. And I want you to have enough skills to stand on your own, no matter how this marriage ends one day. That line made her chest tighten, not from sadness, but from the steady kindness behind it. And so, the lessons began. Every afternoon after the nurse finished caring for her mother, Clara's ride would take her back to the ranch. And every evening, the warm yellow light in Aiden's office was always on, waiting for her. He taught her the simplest things. How to read financial statements. The difference between profit and cash flow. How a ranch operates by season. Livestock feed prices. Fence maintenance and winter feed storage. Land schematics and underground water points. And on some days he spent an entire hour just correcting the way she held a pen while drawing land maps. It's not because I'm picky, Aiden said, his hand guiding hers, warmth passing through his fingers to hers. But because when you do this on your own, accuracy can save an entire season. Clara looked at his hand, veins raised, long fingers, a faint tremor he couldn't hide. Yet he focused more on the land map than on the pain simmering beneath his ribs. You okay? She asked. Aiden stiffened slightly. The meds haven't kicked in yet. It'll pass. But that night, Clara still found him bent over his desk, hand clutching his right flank. She thought he'd fallen asleep, but the sound of pained, restrained breaths was painfully clear in the quiet room. Aiden? She hurried toward him. He tried to straighten, but his eyes stayed shut, sweat beading at his temple. Sorry, just a spasm. I'll get your medicine. Don't. He shook his head, too sharply, which made the pain flare again. I don't want to bother you. That line, don't want to bother you, made something twist inside Clara. People who were dying didn't say, I don't want to bother you. Only people who had been alone with their pain for too long said that. Clara sat down beside him and wrapped her arms around him. You don't have to be strong in front of me. You don't have to do that. Aiden raised his head, dark circles beneath his eyes catching the faintest glimmer of something like hope. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room too long sealed shut. You're not scared of me? He asked, voice so small it hurt her chest. Scared of what? People hurt, so they hurt. A tired but real smile flickered across his lips. The pain slowly eased. His breathing steadied as he leaned back against the chair. You help me more than you realize, Aiden said, voice low and warm. More than I let myself admit. Clara didn't know what to say. She only knew the air around them had changed. Not awkward like two strangers anymore. More like the first warmth after a long winter. And then the cold agreement began to shift. Slowly, but unmistakably. Aiden started leaving books on the table that he thought she might like. Clara began leaving snacks she thought he could eat when medication made him sick. They talked about movies, childhood memories, and how each of them survived things that felt impossible at the time. One evening after Clara closed her notebook, Aiden suddenly said, "Clara, yes, if one day I'm no longer here, but you can still keep learning. You're smart. I just want you to know." He paused, searching for the right words. "I feel more at peace knowing you'll live well." Clara looked at him. The warm desk lamp cast soft light across his face, where pain and kindness lived side by side. And in that moment, her heart softened. Not out of pity, but because there was something profoundly honest in the way he fought his life, and in the way he still wanted her to be safe, even in a future where he didn't exist anymore. That was the night Clara realized the agreement wasn't cold anymore. It was warming, bit by bit, little by little. Morning in Montana began with a light the color of sweet cream, seeping into everything slowly, gently. Clara woke in the wide room to a sudden wave of nausea that forced her to sit up immediately. The smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs, usually comforting, made her stomach twist. She tried to brush it off, thinking it was because she'd stayed up late after her finance lesson with Aiden. But when she stood, a soft dizziness washed over her, making her grip the edge of the bed for balance. "Just stress," she told herself, splashing cold water on her face. But then she looked in the mirror and saw something women tend to recognize quickly. Her skin looked brighter. Her eyes had a glow. Her chest felt more sensitive. And her period? Clara frowned. She unlocked her phone and opened her cycle tracking app. 8 days late, her breath caught. Her heartbeat sped up in a strange mix of fear, hope, and a rush of emotions she couldn't sort fast enough to identify which came first. Clara didn't tell anyone. Not her mother. Not Vale's doctor. Not Aiden. She drove to Silver Creek, stopped at Walgreens, bought 3 pregnancy tests, then went back to grab 2 more, as if quantity might make the result less terrifying. Back at the ranch, she rushed straight into the bathroom and locked herself inside. The first 2 minutes were hell. By the third, her entire life flipped over again. 2 lines, a clear, bold, undeniable. Clara sank onto the cold floor, clutching the test in her hand, tears falling before she even knew what kind they were. Fear, joy, pain, hope, maybe all of them. It took everything she had to step out of the room and find Aiden in his office, where afternoon light streamed through the large windows, making him look both strong and fragile at once. He was looking at medical charts on his monitor, though his eyes were too tired to truly focus. But the moment he saw Clara step in, his expression softened instantly, as if all exhaustion had been set aside in a single second. "Clara, are you okay?" She stood there, hands trembling, silent for a few beats before extending the test toward him. Aiden looked at it, then at her, then back at it. For the first time, Clara saw a grown man, solid, capable, unshakable Aiden, break. Tears slipped down immediately without the slightest attempt to suppress them. He stood up, moved toward her, and instead of hugging her right away, he placed a hand on her stomach, so lightly as if he was afraid of hurting something still forming in the quiet. His voice trembled, almost a whisper. "Clara, you've given me hope. You don't know how much this means to me." She had never seen a man cry so beautifully, not because he was weak, but because every layer of defense had dropped, leaving only the truth of his heart. Instinctively, Clara lifted her arms as if to hug him, but Aiden stepped back gently, not avoiding her, but restraining himself. Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly. Aiden shook his head quickly. "No, not at all. It's just," he swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "From today on, I won't step into your room anymore." Clara froze. "Why?" Aiden drew a deep breath, eyes red but honest, so honest it made her chest ache. "Because you're carrying my child. And I don't want you to think that I ever touched you because of a clause in the contract. That line cut deeper than any love confession in any movie, because it wasn't flirtation. It was respect. It was character. It was kindness so sincere it brought tears to her eyes. But Clara began. But Aiden lifted one finger to her lips, stopping her gently, his eyes warm like fire in a winter night. Not now, he whispered. I want, if anything between us goes further, for it to be because of us. Not the contract, not because my time is short, not because you feel guilty, but because you want it. You choose it. You feel safe. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest, soften, tighten, something she didn't want to name yet, but it was growing stronger, day by day. Aiden guided her to sit, brought her water, and moved carefully around her as though she was the most precious thing he'd ever been allowed to touch. Are you tired? Nauseous? Should I call the doctor? Or do you want me to step out so you can rest? Not a single sentence about the contract. Not one mention of obligation. Not a trace of calculation. Clara looked at his face, pale, shadowed, but his eyes brighter than she had ever seen them. And in that moment, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had begun to love Aiden Vale. Not suddenly, not dramatically, not out of pity, but because he was exactly who he was. A man slowly dying, but still trying with everything he had to live gently. The following months passed like pages of a diary no one had planned to write. Yet every line carried the fingerprints of both Clara and Aiden, fragile, cautious, and beautiful, in a way neither of them dared to look at directly. Aiden began spending more time inside the house, partly because the doctor insisted he reduce his workload, and partly because he enjoyed being near Clara. Not in the way a man enjoys a woman, but in the way someone, perhaps for the first time in their life, feels a big, silent house grow a little less cold. Clara was over 4 months pregnant, her stomach still flat, her petite frame still swallowed by loose sweaters, but her eyes had changed, warmer, rounder, and sometimes glowing when Aiden entered a room, as if her body reacted before her mind could understand why. Aiden noticed. He noticed everything about her. Every day they studied together, just as she asked and just as he promised. Not formal lessons, but long conversations in the reading room, each evening dedicated to a new topic. Cash flow, ranch operations, financial management, risk analysis, Montana land ownership laws, or simply the differences between grass types for the horses. Aiden explained slowly, in his low, steady voice, his fingertips brushing lightly over the pages, while Clara sat across the table, so focused that sometimes he had to stop, just to look at her. She was intelligent in a quiet, unpolished way. Never went to college, yet her ability to catch on and question things made Aiden feel as if he were speaking to a future partner, not the woman he'd married out of desperation. One afternoon, as the last rays of daylight cast gold across the room, Clara rested her chin on her hand while studying a financial chart. Aiden watched her for a long moment before murmuring, "You learn so fast. Sometimes I forget why we even started this." Clara lifted her head. "Why did we, Aiden?" He didn't answer immediately, but his eyes softened so much that her heart faltered a beat. Every evening they had dinner together. At first the meals were quiet, but eventually they began sharing childhood stories. Aiden had grown up in a grand house where no one touched anyone. His mother died when he was 8. His father, a man he referred to only as that man, never hugged him once. Aiden learned to live alone in his room, to be silent, and to become an adult long before he was ready. "I can't remember my mother's voice," Aiden said one night as Clara poured him orange juice. "I only remember her hands, fixing my messy hair before I left the house. My father hated that. He said men shouldn't let women pamper or tidy them up." Clara set the glass down so gently that it didn't make a sound. "I don't think you had an easy childhood." "No one does," he said. "Some people are just better at hiding it." She looked at his face under the warm light, the tired creases around his eyes, the faint yellow tint of liver failure, the determination in every breath he took, and her heart tightened. "What about you?" Aiden asked. "Trailer life. Was it ever happy?" Clara smiled faintly. the kind of smile that made him want to protect her. It was cramped, freezing in winter, hot as an oven in summer, but Mom and I made the best of it. We laughed more than you'd think. I believe that, Aiden said softly. You bring a warmth this house has never had. Clara froze. Aiden froze too. Neither of them meant to say it out loud, but the words hung between them, light yet deep, simple yet heavy with meaning. Love, or the thing that was almost love, didn't come from grand declarations. It came from unintentional touches, their hands brushing when they opened the cabinet, their wrists grazing when he handed her tea, their shoulders nearly touching as they bent over a ranch map. It came from the way Aiden watched every tiny flutter inside her belly, even though the baby was far too small to be seen. It came from the way Clara said his name without fear. Aiden, as if he weren't a CEO with thousands of employees, but simply a man trying to live a few more weeks. But illness has no compassion. It doesn't wait for anyone to love anyone in time. Aiden grew weaker, his skin more yellow, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling even when holding a glass of water. The pain attacked him so intensely that he had to brace against the sink, sweat dripping, breath shallow and broken. One rainy night, as Clara passed the hallway, she heard him almost collapse in the bathroom. She didn't think, she just burst through the door. Aiden was clenching his jaw, one hand gripping the sink, the other pressed to his right side, his whole body shaking as if chilled to the bone. Liver pain, the kind no one should endure. Aiden! Clara rushed to him. He tried to lift his head, lips pale. I'm fine. It'll pass in a minute. She cupped his face, then his shoulder, gentle, slow. Not alone. Not while I'm here. Aiden shut his eyes and tears he had held back his entire life, finally fell onto her hand. Clara, his voice broke, if I had more time, maybe I would have loved you. The sound of rain faded. Time paused. Clara didn't hesitate, didn't tremble like she once did. She placed her hand on his cheek, lifted his face toward hers and kissed him. A soft, quiet kiss. I love you. No pause for doubt, no space for fear. It was simply the truth, as plain and certain as the heartbeat she felt when she pressed her hand to his chest. Aiden cried for the second time in his life, not out of despair, but because pain and happiness collided so forcefully, he didn't know what to call it. He leaned his forehead against her shoulder, breath shaking. Clara, don't! Why? She whispered. Because I'm leaving soon, he breathed. I don't want to take your heart and leave you alone. She wrapped her arms around him, slow and steady, as if holding his pieces together. You're not taking my heart, Clara said. You're teaching it how to love for the first time. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside that small, warm-lit room, the man with only a few months left and the woman carrying his child shared a moment neither of them dared to dream of, but needed more than anything. A love not fully touched, not fully spoken, yet deep enough to make two hearts tremble in the dark. A love almost, a love missing only time. That afternoon, the Montana sky looked like a smear of charcoal dragged hard across paper, gray, heavy, unmoving. Clara had just stepped out of the examination room when she saw Aiden standing in the hallway, one hand gripping the metal chair beside him, as if his body could only stay upright by leaning on it. The doctor had left only minutes earlier, but his words still hung in the cold air. 2 to 6 weeks, if no compatible liver is found. Clara froze. 6 weeks. 6 weeks for a man with AB-Bombay subtype. So rare that only a few dozen people in all of North America shared the same genetic variant. There was almost no chance of changing anything. Aiden didn't look at her immediately. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and said in a voice so calm it frightened her, I'm fine. Clara wanted to scream that he was absolutely not fine, but her throat locked. That night, as mountain winds slammed against the windows hard enough to rattle the glass, she found him in his office. The warm desk lamp cast a long shadow of his body across the wooden floor, and around him were neatly lined white envelopes. Aiden was writing by hand, something he almost never did. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice thin, like footsteps on fragile ice. Aiden didn't look up right away. He folded a letter, slid it into an envelope, and wrote the number 1 in his trembling handwriting, as if each stroke of the pen stole another year of his life. "Letters for Gabriel," he said softly. "One for each of his birthdays, at least until he turns 18. Clara felt something inside her collapse, like someone had crushed her heart in an icy fist. The envelopes on the table, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 18, stood like milestones he knew he would never see. She stepped closer and gently touched his shoulder. "Don't do this," she whispered. "I have to," Aiden replied, lifting his eyes. They were so tired it looked like there was nowhere left for him to hide. "I don't want our son to grow up not knowing that I waited for him, that I loved him, that I hoped every single day to meet him." Clara sank to her knees in front of his chair, holding both of his hands already cold from medication and exhaustion. "You will meet him," she said so fiercely she startled herself. "I won't let you go before." "Clara," he cut her off gently. "Don't promise what you can't control." Her lips trembled as she fought to speak, but tears spilled before any words could. Aiden lifted a hand and brushed one tear from her cheek with a tenderness so impossibly soft it felt unreal. "You know," he murmured, "I'm not that afraid of dying." Clara's head snapped up. "Aiden." "What scares me," he continued, "is that he'll grow up not remembering me, not hearing my voice, not knowing my laugh, not knowing how much his father loved him, even without ever seeing his face." Clara gripped his hands tighter, as if she could anchor him to the world by sheer desperation. "I'll tell him," she said, her voice breaking. "Every day, every little thing. You won't be forgotten, Aiden. Not ever." Something in the room paused, just for a heartbeat. Aiden closed his eyes softly, like someone finally releasing a fear that had been haunting him for far too long. When he opened them again, the look he gave her told Clara everything. He loved her, not almost, not if he had more time, but now, fully, unhidden. He leaned down slowly, as if asking permission with every breath. "Clara," he said her name like a prayer. She cupped his cheek, the faint yellow tint of his skin soft under her fingertips. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm always here." The space between them dissolved. The first kiss was a crack-opening light, trembling, tear-stained, like they were trying to press a seal onto each other's lives before the first winter wind could steal it away. The second kiss was deeper, more desperate, an admission they had both held back for far too long. Aiden pressed his forehead to hers, breath unsteady. "I love you," he said with no hesitation, no fear. "I love you. More than I should." Clara choked on a sob and wrapped her arms around him as if time itself was trying to pull him from her grasp. "I love you too," she whispered, "even if it scares me." Outside the window, Montana winds rolled across the empty fields, howling as if trying to erase every sound. But inside that small room of Vale Ranch, two people held on to each other, not because of a contract, not because of duty, but because their hearts had finally chosen one another. Even if the time left was measured in weeks. In that moment, they decided to love each other as if an entire lifetime still waited ahead. Snow had begun falling in the afternoon, but by midnight, the real storm swept across the valley like a thick white curtain slamming against the windows. Inside the wide ranch house, Clara began feeling the first contractions. Light, uneven, but growing sharper by the minute. She tried to breathe steadily, one hand gripping the edge of the bed, the other cupping her belly. Gabriel was coming, earlier than expected. A nurse on night shift rushed in the moment she saw Clara bending over from the tightening waves. "Clara, we need to get you to the delivery room now." Clara nodded, breath fractured. But the first thing she asked was not about herself. "Aiden, is he okay?" The nurse glanced toward the dark hallway. "His condition isn't good, Clara. The doctors are trying to manage the symptoms. He's asked for you many times." Clara bit her lip as they pushed the wheelchair toward the elevator. Because right next door, just one wall away, the man she loved was dying. Aiden Vale, the strongest, most stubborn, most gentle man she had ever known, was lying there, breathing through an oxygen mask, his liver nearly shutting down. The delivery room door closed behind her. The smell of disinfectant, the white lights, the monitor beeping, everything blended into something terrifying and sacred all at once. A sudden contraction tore through her, and Clara cried out, "Aiden, I'm scared." She could hear her own heartbeat pounding so fiercely it felt like the entire room was trembling with it. "She's ready," the doctor said. One scream ripped itself from her lungs, then another. Clara clutched the mattress, sweat dripping, vision blurring, and then a cry. A tiny, sharp, impossibly strong cry, louder and purer than anything she had ever imagined a newborn voice could carry. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. "A healthy baby boy." Clara burst into tears instantly. Tears of pain, joy, and a miracle she never thought someone like her would ever get to touch. They placed the baby on her chest, small, warm, soft, smelling of milk and new skin. Gabriel Vale, her son, Aiden's son. "My baby," Clara whispered, pressing a trembling kiss to his forehead. "You're your father's miracle." She asked to see Aiden immediately. Aiden's room glowed dimly under the wall lamp. He lay turned slightly to the side, his body thin and wasted, his skin a deeper shade of yellow than days before. Every breath was heavy, as though he had to drag the entire sky into his lungs just to survive one more second. "Aiden," Clara whispered. His eyes opened, slowly, painfully. But when he saw Gabriel in her arms, that dim light inside him sharpened, as if someone who'd walked through an endless night suddenly saw a final glimpse of sunrise. "You," he reached out, hand trembling. "Clara? The baby?" She placed Gabriel into his hands, angling the tiny face toward his father. Gabriel stirred, lips puckering, eyes fluttering open. And in that moment, Aiden seemed to come back to life. He touched his son's cheek, so gently he looked afraid he might hurt him. "He's beautiful. Looks like you." His voice cracked. "I love you. Clara, I love both of you." Clara cried, leaning down to kiss his hair. "I love you. Please, don't leave me." She could feel his breathing grow weaker. The monitor's rhythm slowed. A harsh cough, a choked groan. Aiden whispered, "I can go peacefully now." "No, Aiden, look at me." She held his face. "You have to live. You have to live to watch your son grow up." Aiden tried to smile. A broken inhale. "I've seen enough." Then, click. The door burst open. A phone rang sharply through the near-silent room. Dr. Gray rushed in, his face pale. Whether from shock or joy, no one could tell. "Clara, Aiden, we just received a call from the Denver Transplant Center. There's a donor liver and kidney, matching Aiden's blood type." Clara froze. A nurse nearly screamed. "A Bombay subtype? That practically doesn't exist." "We have to start surgery now," Dr. Gray said, breathless. "If we don't, the opportunity will be lost." Clara turned back to Aiden, his face swimming through her tears. "Aiden," she said, gripping his hand, shaking. "Do you hear me? There's hope. You can live. You can watch Gabriel go to school. You can watch him grow up." His eyes widened, blinking rapidly as if he didn't dare believe it. "I have a chance?" "You have to live," Clara cried out. "You have to live so he knows who his father is." At once, the medical team surged into the room like a wave. They lifted Aiden onto a gurney, checked his vitals, and hooked him to new lines. Clara clutched Gabriel to her chest as the operating room doors swung open. And right before they wheeled Aiden down that bright, cold hallway, he turned his head, unable to speak, but his eyes overflowing with something words could never capture. He wanted to live. For them. "I'll come back to you," Clara sobbed. "I promise." The doors closed behind him, leaving her standing there, holding her newborn son, on a night when snow blanketed the entire ranch, and when life and hope returned like a miracle neither fate nor logic could have predicted. After the helicopter flew Aiden to the transplant center in Billings, the Montana sky looked torn in half. One side filled with fear large enough to swallow Clara whole, the other a fragile hope she didn't dare breathe too strongly upon. For 12 hours of surgery, Clara sat in the hospital hallway with Gabriel wrapped in a fleece blanket, counting each tick of the wall clock. The man she loved was lying between life and death, and all she could do was pray with a heart already cracked open. When the doctor finally walked out, surgical cap still damp with sweat, Clara jumped to her feet, her knees nearly giving out. "The transplant was successful," he said, voice hoarse but warm. "He has a long recovery ahead, but Aiden Vale is alive." Clara pressed her baby to her chest, tears spilling before she could stop them. Gabriel, sensing everything, nestled his cheek against her, making a soft cooing sound as if comforting her. And in that moment, Clara understood. The night her son was born had not only brought a new life into the world, it had pulled her man back into it. The weeks that followed unfolded like a healing film, slow, gentle, filled with light. Aiden lay in the recovery room, his skin no longer the sickly yellow it once was, his eyelids fluttering each time Clara came in with Gabriel in her arms. She hummed softly while putting the baby to sleep, then set him in the small cradle beside Aiden's bed. So every doctor and nurse would see that this patient had a reason far too big not to fight his way back. One misty morning, Aiden opened his eyes and found Gabriel gripping his finger, tiny, delicate, small enough to disappear inside Aiden's palm. And Aiden cried, not from pain, but from survival. "I'm still here because of you two," he whispered, voice rough, hand trembling as he brushed Clara's hair when she leaned down. "Thank you for not letting go of me." Clara smiled softly, eyes stinging. "I told you. I want you to see him grow up." And Aiden believed that more than he believed in his own breath. Brian, with his shiny suit and greedy eyes, showed up exactly 3 times at the hospital, and all 3 times was escorted out by the Vale Industries legal team. He had an entire lawsuit prepared to seize the company. But when he faced Aiden, steadily recovering, gaze sharper than ever, he knew every one of his schemes had turned to dust. Aiden Vale had survived, and no one would take back what belonged to him. 6 months later, Montana bloomed into golden summer. The rolling fields around Vale Ranch looked like waves of honey. The sky was impossibly clear, every cloud painted like a watercolor stroke. Aiden returned to the ranch on a late afternoon, the sun slanting just right, outlining his silhouette in gold. Clara stood on the porch, Gabriel perched on her hip, the baby's hair soft as silk. Aiden stepped out of the car, eyes locked on them the entire time. He was home, not the man counting down his final days, but a father, a husband, a man given a second chance. Clara hurried down the steps when she saw him sway slightly, fatigue still lingering from recovery, and she moved to steady him. "Careful," she whispered. He looked at her, eyes filled with more meaning than words could ever hold. "I'm standing in front of the 2 most beautiful things in my life," Aiden murmured, touching Gabriel's head. "I'm not missing a single moment now." Clara laughed, and Gabriel laughed with her, a tiny perfect sound like a brand new melody meant only for their family. That sunset with the sky glowing orange and the wind brushing across the fields. Aiden asked Clara to step outside onto the porch. She brought Gabriel along, assuming he wanted all 3 of them to watch the sun go down. But then Aiden knelt, not rushed, not shaky, but with the certainty of a man who had walked through death to come back. Clara gasped, nearly dropping Gabriel. "Aiden, what are you doing?" Aiden looked up, his eyes clearer than the sunset behind him. "You came to me because of a contract," he said, voice deep but trembling with emotion. "You signed it to save your mother. You stayed to give me a child. But I—" He placed a hand over his heart, his new heart, new liver, and new life. "And I want you to stay because of love, not paper, not deals, just us." Tears hit Clara's eyes instantly. Aiden continued, "Marry me. This time? For real?" Gabriel waved his tiny hands as if waiting for her answer too. Clara knelt down, pressing her forehead to his. "Aiden Vale," she whispered, voice breaking, but sweet as honey. "This time there is no contract, no 1-year limit, no countdown." She placed Gabriel between them, their living proof of the miracle they had fought so hard for. "I'm staying," she said, smiling through tears, "because I love you, and because this is my home." Aiden gathered them both into his arms, trembling like a man holding the entire universe to his chest. A month later, Vale Ranch held their second wedding, a celebration full of wildflowers, soft country music, friends, ranch workers, and family, all under a sky so blue it felt hand-painted just for that day. Clara wore a simple white dress, her hair half up, her face radiant. Aiden, healthy, bright-eyed, no trace of the yellow that once haunted him, held her hand and never let go. Clara's mother, now fully recovered after her kidney transplant, sat in the front row, eyes shimmering as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle with the man who had saved both of them. When the minister asked, "Do you promise to love her for the rest of your life?" Aiden answered without hesitation, "My old life was almost gone, but this new one, the one I was given back, exists because of her. I promise to love her with everything I have." Clara laughed through her tears. "You talk too much," she teased. "I'm catching up for the years I lost." "Keep catching up," she said, "but maybe not right now. People are watching." Laughter rippled across the ranch, blending with the wind, the sounds of horses in the nearby stables, and Gabriel babbling happily in the arms of the babysitter. When Clara and Aiden kissed a kiss shaped by death, miracles, pain, and hope, everyone knew. Neither of them believed in fairy tales. But that day, Vale Ranch became a real one, and it was only the first year of the miracle. The Montana afternoon was as soft as a cashmere blanket stretched across the fields, the breeze drifting through the pines and turning the sunset into shimmering strokes of gold. Clara Vale stood on the porch of their new farmhouse, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, taking in a view that was both familiar and something that made her heart want to smile one more time each day. Farther out, where the fields opened wide like a sea of swaying grass, Gabriel Vale, 10 years old, was riding the chestnut gelding Aiden had given him for his 8th birthday. Gabriel rode with confidence, his posture straight, his small hands firm and sure on the reins. He laughed, a bright, ringing sound that stretched far across the evening sky. Clara cherished that moment like a gift fate had returned to her, a gift she once believed she would never have the chance to receive. Behind her, the floorboards creaked under a very familiar set of footsteps. She didn't need to turn around. The rhythm alone was enough. Aiden Vale, the man who once had 2 to 6 weeks to live, stepped onto the porch, his gait still steady and straight as ever. Only now his eyes were brighter, stronger, and more peaceful than all those years before. "He's pushing the limits again," Aiden said, standing beside her, his arms crossed out of habit. The soft wind ruffled a few strands of his hair, making him look years younger than he was. Clara tilted her head toward him. "You said he could ride freely within the east fence?" "Yeah," Aiden exhaled, "but he's heading toward the South Creek now. And you know, I tried to act relaxed about it, but my heart isn't cooperating." Clara laughed softly, taking his hand. "You're always like this, so tough until it involves your son." Aiden pursed his lips in a way that suggested protest, but pride gleamed through it anyway. "Well, he takes after you." "Me?" Clara blinked. "Me, brave like him." Aiden looked at her for a long moment, his smile so gentle it felt like a warm blanket settling over her shoulders. "You're braver than he is, braver than anyone I've ever known." Clara looked down at her tea to hide the faint blush on her cheeks. Even after 10 years of marriage, one kind sentence from Aiden still made her heart react like they'd only just fallen in love a week ago. Gabriel circled back, and Aiden narrowed his eyes, tracking every stride of the horse. Old instincts from a man who had once nearly lost everything, making him overly cautious at times. But when he saw the boy steer the horse like a seasoned rider, his shoulders finally eased. "I'm proud of him," Clara said quietly. Aiden smiled. "I'm proud of us." A moment later, Gabriel jumped off the horse and ran up to the porch, his cheeks flushed from the cold, hair wind-mussed, eyes bright as stars. "Mom! Dad! I did the double jump. Not the big one, just the wood log, but I did it twice." Clara laughed, wrapping him in her arms and kissing the top of his head. "I know. I saw everything." Aiden ruffled Gabriel's hair, something the boy pretended to dislike, but leaned into anyway. "My little hero," Aiden murmured. Gabriel looked between the two of them, those warm brown eyes so much like Aiden's, that Clara sometimes felt she was looking at the man she had loved since his darkest moment. "Dad," Gabriel said, hesitating the way children do when they're trying to understand grown-up things. "When I was born, you almost died because of me, right?" The question fell onto the porch as softly as snow dust, but it made Aiden and Clara exchange a glance. The time had come to tell him the truth they had always intended to share when he was ready, not to scare him, but to help him understand. Clara sat down on the long bench and pulled Gabriel into her lap. Aiden sat beside them, placing a hand on both their backs. "Not because of you," Clara said, her voice warm and soft like flannel. "Your father came back to life because of you." Gabriel frowned, waiting for an explanation. Aiden took a slow breath, the sunset casting a calm glow across half his face, making him look like a gentler version of his past self. "Back then," Aiden said, "I was very sick. Sick enough that the doctors didn't think I could wait for a donor liver anymore. My blood type is extremely rare. You already know that." Gabriel nodded. "But right when you were born," Clara continued, hugging him closer, "the doctor called with news that a donor had been found. Someone who matched your father. A miracle. Exactly that. A miracle that came just when I was about to give up," Aiden added, his hand tightening gently on his son's shoulder. "When I saw you for the first time, I knew I had to live. Not to run away from death anymore, but to run toward you." Gabriel was silent, his eyes widening. "So, I saved you?" Aiden let out a soft, sweet laugh. "I don't want to say it like that, but yeah, you're the reason I'm alive." Gabriel pressed his face into Aiden's chest, wrapping his small arms around him. Aiden held him tight, eyes closing, unable to hide the emotion of the moment. Clara watched them, her heart swelling with a fullness she once thought she didn't deserve. A few minutes later, Gabriel ran inside to grab a new coat. Aiden remained on the porch, eyes following their son until he disappeared. Then he turned to Clara. "I still can't get used to it when he asks questions like that," he said, touching her cheek gently. "It reminds me how close everything came to ending." Clara placed her hand over his and gave a gentle squeeze. "But it didn't end. You're here. He's here. The ranch is here. We're here." Aiden lowered his head, pressing a small kiss to her forehead, a kiss carrying the weight of a lifetime vow. "I never thought I'd have a family," Aiden whispered. "Back then, I signed that contract with you just to save the company, the ranch, everything I thought mattered. But it turns out the things that meant the most didn't arrive until you walked into my life." Clara looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "I never thought I'd have happiness after everything I went through. But you came, right on time, even in the craziest circumstances." Aiden smiled. "You know what the strangest part is?" "What?" "I don't think we were brought together by a contract. I think we were brought together by destiny." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "Destiny delivered by a letter that said, 'For humanitarian and legal reasons,' huh?" "Hey," Aiden pretended to protest. "I was very polite." "Yeah, very polite asking a complete stranger to have your baby." "I was desperate," Aiden argued. "But you agreed. For my mom. And now?" Clara looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Now, for you." Aiden pulled her into his chest, savoring a few seconds of quiet filled only with wind and heartbeat. When Gabriel returned, bundled in a warm coat and carrying a comic book his teacher had lent him, he plopped himself between his parents, tugging their hands together. "We're the family Dad thought he'd never have," Aiden said, voice low and warm, pressing a kiss to Gabriel's hair. Clara leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, her hand slipping easily into his. The sunset deepened into indigo. The warm lights inside the house flicked on, bathing the three of them in the glow of a home. A home once built from desperation, from tears, from painful choices. But ending with one thing: love. A marriage once signed to outrun death had opened an entire lifetime for both of them. And as the wind drifted across the fields, Clara knew from that moment on, nothing in the world could ever break them apart. Two lives, one destiny, and a true family.